Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Language Matters. We have an incredible guest today. We have Dr. Gregory Williams, who is with Baylor College of Medicine. Dr. Williams, welcome to our podcast, and tell us a few words about yourself and about the work you do.
Yeah, Mila, it's great to be with you today, and thank you for inviting me. It's an honor, and thank you for being on my program a week or so ago. You did an awesome job. And the more I understand the work and the important work that you do, the more I realize that I really didn't have a clue of the importance of what language and having a complete understanding of real solid communication was and how important it is in the diversity that we have, like in communities of Houston. I came from a small Middle East city up north and never did have much diversity in my childhood. So when I came to Houston, obviously it's a cultural change for me. And I wrote a book about 3 years ago about me being sexually abused as a child every day of my childhood up to my almost 17th birthday. And in that writing of the book, I just assumed that everybody would understand what I was saying. And that's just not the case, because there's so many different ways to put trauma into words. And I think it's important that we have a clear understanding of what we're trying to communicate, because experiencing trauma is tough enough. Trying to explain it and put it in words sometimes is even tougher. And in our world right now, it's important for us to be able to have clear and consistent understanding of each other in everything that we do.
And thank you for writing that book, right? It's very important bringing this message in, and I think you have an interesting story where you first self-published it, right? And how many copies did you end up selling initially? Because publishing companies, you first had to publish it because publishing companies wouldn't take the project, right?
No, they wouldn't even look at me. It would be one of those, thank you for submitting, but until I sold about 225,000 copies on my own from my bedroom, stuffing envelopes and mailing them out and doing them any way I could, I finally got several publishers that wanted to do my work. The first publisher was a major publisher in the religious field, and they immediately wanted to come in and cut out everything about the abuse out. And it's like, wait, that makes no sense. That was my story. That's what I'm trying to convey to people. So I turned that down. And then about a week or two later, HCI Publishing, that also published The Child Called It book, which is a very popular abuse book. And then also the Chicken Soup for the Soul series contacted me and said, hey, would you be interested in letting us republish it under our publishing company? And to date, I believe I just sold over 700,000 copies of the book now. And I have a new book coming out, and I'm looking for any day for it to be two-wheeled in here to my penthouse so I can actually see what it's going to look like. So it's due out any day.
Well, that's incredible, but that, I think the numbers themselves show how much interest people have, which also means how many people are impacted by trauma. So yeah. If we go back to Language Matters and if we go to trauma-informed care, one of the key components of trauma-informed care is rebuilding trust. So when you in your work and in your personal experience working with somebody who has been affected by trauma, what role do you see, and even in the English to English, let's just stay with an English to English encounter, what role do you see language playing in rebuilding that trust?
Well, it's amazing because trust is probably one of the hardest things to regain after the trust has been broken, especially with somebody that you're supposed to have the most protective relationship with, as in my case with my father. So when I counsel people now with trauma, since I'm a trauma expert, people will call me anonymously over my 1-800 number and talk to me for hours. But when I finally find out who they are, if they want to share that with me, then sometimes the trust isn't there. But as long as they're anonymous, they'll tell the story. But when they reveal who they are, or up front, I ask who they are or what location they're in so I could get them help in the city or country that they're in, there's an immediate wall that starts going back up because they're like, wait, as long as I can not tell you who I am, I just need help. I just want somebody to listen to me. And I think there's so much judgment, Mila, on abuse. And me being a man, I think is even more so because men are abused, I think, just as often as women. But men have a whole different set of issues that is harder for them to overcome when they're dealing with their abuse because of that stigma of, you're going to question my manhood. If I even express this to you, what kind of man are you going to think I am? And that's a major hurdle that I have to overcome right up front. I don't think my book is so fantastic. That's why it's selling so much. I think it is so that people are so looking for and in the need of hope. And that's why I think everybody's buying it, because there's just not much hope out there. And they're looking to find anything they can to make it through the next day.
So it's that listening, it's the act of active listening that helps with building trust. And it's also probably the words we use and the nonverbal communication that we use, right? That helps in building that trust. Because how do you get a kid or an adult who has been through trauma, and there are different degrees of trauma, right? There are people coming out of the war zones where they lost everything. There are people who watched their loved ones killed. There are people who have been tortured and abused themselves, people who have been through human trafficking. So various domestic violence, various degrees of trauma. So how do we, as professionals, as caregivers, as doctors, as the care team, and as language professionals, how do we watch our language when we talk to a person who's been through trauma to help build that trust? What do we do?
Well, I think the first thing is, and you hit the nail on the head with listening. I think that is so important. Trauma-informed workplaces, trauma-informed hospitals, clinics, schools, police force, first responders. You can trauma-inform anything anymore because it's so important. Here I am in Houston, as you are, and we recently, several years ago, had a flood that came in, and 3 people on my team that I supervised at Baylor lost their homes, everything. And because of that, I started to see a new way that these 3 ladies were responding to months after. When it would start raining, I could start seeing them get really agitated and nervous. And they would come to my office and they go, "Hey, it looks like it's storming." It's like, well, yeah, we're supposed to get some rain today. And I didn't start putting the pieces together until I realized, wait, I need to understand they lost everything a couple months ago when it started raining. So now when they would come into my office during a storm, and it could be even a small storm, I would literally say, would it make you feel better if I just let you go home and you work from home for the rest of the day and just log on and do your work from there? So you're at your home. And they always go, oh, yes. Even though the meteorologists don't even mention that it's going to even be a bad storm, just the fact that it's raining again would re-trigger or pull the scab off any type of healing that they have experienced in the past because of losing their house. And that's just a simple example, but it's so important that we have an understanding of where everybody is at. We all have different baggage that we're carrying. And it's important that we listen and understand where they're coming from in whatever the area that is. So important.
For language professionals and caregivers, it's extra important for us to listen for the words, to make sure that we don't re-traumatize, and be very, very careful and look for cues, right? And to be there with the person. And any other advice that you have on that, building trust and trauma-informed care, that maybe a couple other pointers that we can use?
Yeah, I think especially as parents, I think especially as supervisors, team leaders, doctors, nurses, I think it's so important that when someone is finally starting to build the trust and they start sharing the experience with you, that we try to have no reaction, but of care. Because if a parent is listening to their daughter tell their first experience of, hey, my boyfriend touched me wrong the other night, and if the parent goes, what? Immediately the wall will go up and that child will shut down, and probably take a long time before they ever reopen that again, because there's a reaction. So if my kids right now, they're older, but if they would come to me and say, hey, Dad, I just ran over a little old lady in a car on the way to see you today, and they're expressing that to me, I wouldn't have a response of reactionary. I would say, okay, what happened? Why only one? Was it the only one in the road? Instead of any type of judgment to them, because you want them to open up fully. And if they see any type of red light, even a yellow light, they're going to start saying, wait, I can't trust you. And I think in the medical field, if we immediately go in and say, hey, wait, I'm a mandatory reporter, I have to report this. And if it's in human trafficking and their Romeo is out in the waiting room, and we mention that, they're automatically looking for the exit door. How can I get out of here and never bring it up again? It needs to be full of empathy, care, understanding, and an open door of literally leaning in and, okay, sure. How'd that make you feel? Are you safe now? And those kind of leading questions, but not any type of judgment. And I think that's really important. That I don't, to be honest with you, I think majority of our physicians today don't have that training. They're built to see what's wrong, apply the knowledge that they have been taught over all these years without the benefit of gift wrapping and handing it to you. Oh, that's what you got. This is what you need to do. See you later. When you deal with trauma informedness and trauma informed care, it takes, Mila, what? Time, effort. And a lot of the physicians don't have that time. They have 6 people they have to see in an hour, but time is important, of essence, to build trust.
Not showing your reaction. And there was time when I actually was affected by vicarious trauma and affected by some of the stories that or situations that I was interpreting for without knowing what it is before I started learning about it. And there was a time when I actually, hearing somebody's story, got sick, physically ill. My reaction was so strong, I got ill in the room. So I think the point here that you're trying to make is that it is so important that we as language professionals and professionals are so aware about trauma and vicarious trauma that we experience, that no matter how we feel on the inside and what reactions on the outside, we remain calm and we don't go into, oh my God, that was, whoa, even like our eyes, our body language going, whoa, in a state of shock, what happened, right? We remain. And so how would you do that? How do you do that? You have, what would you be advised? How do I not have an expression on my face?
The The best way I can illustrate it, and it just came to me, so I don't know if this is a good illustration or not, but just as you were saying that, is I try to make myself an emotional sponge, and I take all of it in. And if they decide to squeeze and want something to come back, then I will release something or an emotion or a thought or another question. But if all they're doing is giving me information, then I want to soak all of that in so I can get as much of the story. A lot of times when I am in my first counseling session or two with people, if they're talking about something of major trauma, I will say, I tell you what, can you read a chapter of the book? And I'll hand them my book and write a couple pages of what happened to you on one of the most traumatic nights, and then just share it with me. And in that, pour out all of that emotion on the page. And I always use the words bleed on the page, and then share it with me, even if it's an email or if you want to call me back and read it to me. And I try to get, and I'll give them prompts. What was the time of the day? What was the temperature? What was the colors that were in the room? What was the smells that you experienced during that time of trauma? And try to get all of that out of them. And then you start seeing these layers building into a foundation of going, wow, I have majority of the story, even though I don't know how you feel. I'm starting to understand where the pain is coming from and why the pain hurts so bad.
So that's incredible. And that's the advice, I think, making sure that we have no emotional reaction. We don't react, we remain within, with active listening, and as interpreters with active interpreting in that time. Another question I have to you is that you mentioned in your book that you were that perfect child, because many times we're taught to learn for signs of abuse. And we talk about it may be very visual signs of abuse, or a person, especially a child, may be unkept or dirty or other obvious signs. And in your case, I believe all the signs were the opposite, right? You're talking about being that perfect child, well-dressed, and always having perfect grades. So yet you were talking about how you were trying to communicate, almost silently scream, right? If I remember your words correctly, about trouble. So where can we look for those cues? Are those words? How do we listen? How do we see those cues of extreme abuse from a person who doesn't have any visible signs of abuse?
Well, excellent question. And I didn't have the normal red flags that you notice in a child that is agitated or a bully or is mean, and the grades start dropping and tardy and things of that order. I literally was the president of my class and student council. I got straight A's. I sat in the front of the class. My hair was so neat. My mom and dad made sure that I had great clothes. We came from an upper middle class neighborhood, the best dressed child there. So all of those things were seen as, oh, he must be all right. And they just looked over me. So I kind of flew under the radar, even though I was in the radar of being, there must not be anything wrong with him. But I do literally a 2-hour workshop on the eyes. And I think it's so important for us to connect with people in their eyes. And when I, even today, find somebody that I'm talking with, I'll ask them, how are you? And look at them straight in the eyes. And I can be able to tell if they're buffaloing me, lying to me, or just avoiding me. And I think that's so important, even the ones that have been or that involved in human trafficking. And I think you know more about this than in other cultures. You don't want to make eye contact. Some cultures will not make eye contact with you for various reasons. But in my world, If I really want to find out what's going on with somebody, I will look into the eyes. And if you can see the cover of my book and look in the eyes of that kindergarten child, 5 years old, there's pain there. There's pain and there's heartache there. Even though the rest of the boy looks all right, I couldn't have been that good of an actor. And nobody, Mila, all the way through high school, ever asked me, is there anything wrong? And I had physical signs on my body where I was bruised and cut and things of that order because of, I had the signs of rips in my mouth where I was forced in several different situations in gang rapes, things in my mouth, and my mouth would be split open. And I would just say, oh, it's just chapped lips and things of that order. But I think it's so important to really connect and get away from taking notes and this thing and putting the phone down and connecting with people. And then to notice if their actions are different than what they were the day before, or if at a certain time of day, they act more agitated than others. And I did this less than a year ago. I started noticing every day about this time, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Mila, I would start getting really uncomfortable. And I'd be at the office and I'd get fidgety and it's like, what's going on with me? And then I've read some research of, hey, when you go through this kind of emotion, figure out, start doing an audit. So I started auditing my day every day around 3:30, 3:45, 4 o'clock. I would get really nervous and uncomfortable. And then I figured out what was going on in my life that would cause that agitation. And then I realized every day between 3:30 and 4 o'clock, my father would pick me up after school from my aunt and uncle's house where I was dropped off from the school bus and take me home. And that's when the abuse started happening. Even though I don't recognize that, my brain never forgot it. And it remembered that. Nighttime's terrible for me. Holiday time's terrible for me. Father's Day yesterday, horrendous day. It could have been a wonderful day for most fathers, but for me, it brought back all of that pain. Christmas is one of those that, even though I love Christmas, it brings back a lot of anxiety. And I think just understanding who we are and how we deal with different events in our lives and being open to being informed of how people react to different situations, I think can be so important in the way we communicate with other people.
For the interpreters in that case, it would be very important listening to subtle cues.
Yes.
And I have, recently remember another of the survivors talking, one of the key people in surviving sex trafficking, in the documentary Surviving Sex Trafficking. She was telling her story and she said she called 911 looking for help. And that was the time when her abuser, her handler, put a gun to her head and said, tell him everything is okay. And so she was saying everything was okay, but her on the inside, she was screaming, it's not. And she was going, I wish anybody would pick up a cue that it's not okay. And the way I'm saying it, it's not okay, even though the words are okay. And so a person on the other end hung up and nothing ever happened. She never got any help. In fact, she ended up being more abused after that situation. So it is, every word matters, no matter how awkward or out of place that word is. So when we're interpreting in the situation, because then you have the, when we're interpreting, that means that that person whomever is being abused is already receiving help, potential help.
Yeah, you know, I think that's a great point. I think when we do the trauma-informed care, it would be important to, as we're talking to somebody, maybe understanding if it's like a human trafficking, to give them an opportunity. Hey, if you're not safe right now when you leave this office, and you feel like you're going to be hurt, can you clench your fist for me? And if they don't, okay. But if they do, it gives you that permission to open the door for other things. We did one thing at Texas Children's, which was so awesome, that increased the amount of abuse cases being reported, is that when a lady would come in being ready to deliver a baby and the significant other was with them, they would always be right at their side. And we would ask, is it safe for you after this baby is delivered to be able to go back home? Do you live in a safe environment for you and your to be born baby? And when the spouse or significant other's right there, majority of the time, oh yes. So we came up with a game plan of asking the significant other, hey, we're printing wristbands. Can you go out to the front desk, retrieve those wristbands for us and bring those back into us, and I'll finish up here. And when they do that, while they're gone, we ask the question. And the percentage of those that admitted that they're not safe tripled overnight. Boom. And it was something simple as that, recognizing that you don't know what's happening on the other end or what that person's doing next to them, squeezing their hand, or just their presence is threatening to them, to give them a freedom to share what's really going on in their world.
And that's incredible. And I'm so glad that that ended up being done at Texas Children's, that I think that's incredibly important. And I know you're also delivering a very strong message to schools, right? Where the teachers are in a way front line of defense in reporting the abuse. A lot of our interpreters work at schools as educational interpreters. So what are the things that are important, so looking into the eyes, but what are the other things that you would say are important in terms of being able to pick up on abuse, and also, again, where language matters in trauma-informed communication?
Yeah, I think one key is anything that is abnormal from normal behavior. So for instance, if the kids are all lined up, let's say they're fifth grade kids or fourth grade kids, all lined up to go to lunch, and Linda accidentally bumps into Jimmy in the line, and Jimmy just automatically raises his elbow and goes, boom, right into Linda's nose and bloodies her nose. Immediately, we grab Jimmy out of the line and go, what kind of kid are you? Go to the principal's office, yada, yada, yada. Why would you do something as crazy as that? And that's the reaction. But when you really look at the picture, to me, and I try to teach this to teachers all over the country, don't automatically go to that extreme. Pull Jimmy out, talk, address the situation, but understand you just saw an abnormal response to, hey, stop pushing me, to an automatic aggression. And it went from here to here in a New York minute. And when it happens that fast, it ought to throw up a red flag. Don't get on the phone and call child care, welfare. Oh, we have a problem. But it ought to throw up a red flag. There's an abnormal response that is out of range for normalcy of a response. And we see something that drastic. We see it all the time, do we not, in Houston? That if you cut somebody off on the highway, they will chase you, and possibly a road rage comes into play, and they'll pull out a gun. And we see that almost every week, somebody shooting somebody on the road. Chances are, Mila, that has nothing to do with somebody accidentally cutting them off on the highway. Chances are it's something that happened to them years ago that they never dealt with. And that was the last straw, that I'm going to let anybody cut me off again. And we get this reaction, immediately goes to this. And it's somebody that has been traumatized and never had healing. And I think especially in children, at certain times of the day when it's getting ready for most kids to be excited to go home at the end of the day, If you see a child start getting reserved and quiet and in that position of, oh, despair almost, it's like, well, why does that child react that way? They're getting to go home. Home may not be the safest place for them. And that ought to automatically throw up a red flag of, I need to pay attention to that. Could it just be a bad day? They just don't feel well. A lot of teachers think that kids love surprises. Let me tell you, if you're a traumatized child, you hate surprises. So they come in and go, hey, surprise, we're not going to do science today. We're going to do math first. And if you're so in an environment of wanting everything to be controlled and regulated, it throws them into a whole different state of being. I have to, before I take my nap at night, before I go to work in the morning, I have to have everything set out because I have OCD. I have to have my socks here, my shorts here, my shirt here and iron, my pants here, my necktie, my suit. And if anything messes that up, it throws my whole day off, even to the point where I was counting steps. If it takes me 29 steps to get to the elevator and somebody meets me in the hallway and causes me to add a couple steps, I'll take longer strides to get to the elevator to get back up to 29. It took me, I still have issues with that, of counting steps.
Being traumatized. So in that case, again, for us as language professionals and those who are listening, it's not just spoken words that matter. Language matters from the point of view of body language, talk language, tonality language, all ways that we communicate that matters in terms of being able to see the red flags. So I want to get back to our interpreters to say that it's incredibly important to absolutely accurately interpret everything that you observe and that you see, not just the words, but the tonality, the expression, the small innuendos in terms of maybe a little expression or lack of expression. Those are all the things that are important not to be overlooked. And a trained professional on the other end is watching for those things and for those cues. And when working with a child or an adult in English, it's easy. It's same language to same language, but working through an interpreter adds that additional complexity. So every word matters in this particular case. Yeah. And I think I would say that the role that the interpreters play is extra critical. And Dr. Williams, with that, I want to thank you and for the wisdom that you've given us, for the experience that you are sharing. I want to invite people to read your book, again, Shattered by the Darkness, Gregory Williams. And also, what time is your radio show?
It is 8 p.m. live, 8 p.m. every Sunday night, Central Time. It's on BBS Radio, and it runs an hour, and it's heard all the way around the world. And then the following week, it goes into the podcast world. I don't know how that works, but it's live radio. So I just really enjoy, and I have like 1.7 million live listeners every Sunday evening. It's wonderful.
Wonderful. And if any of our listeners or our interpreters want to contact you, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can call me or text me at 832-396-6525. Or if you want to email me at GAWILLI and the number 1 at texaschildrens.org. And I literally will answer you within minutes 24/7. I get people from Australia and England and all these different time zones that email me. So I'm up majority of the night trying to help as many people as I can via email.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for being on our podcast. And thank you for the work that you do.
Well, Mila, I want to thank you for taking the importance of interpreting into the importance of not just interpreting words, but you're changing lives in that interpreting words. And that makes all the difference. And your heart is as big as I've ever seen someone's heart. So thank you so much for the work that you do. Keep being a champion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.